The Greek myths treat heroes differently from mere mortals. Heroes are so important to Greek mythology that they even have their own distinct creation story. In the last lecture, we explored how Prometheus, at least according to some ancient authorities, created mankind out of clay. According to other traditions, however, it was Zeus who created humanity, and in fact, he did it himself multiple times, with each successive creation being worse than the previous one. Zeus began with the Golden Age, followed by the Silver Age, then the Bronze Age, and then the Age of the Heroes. He ended with the Iron Age, the age in which human beings as we know them are created. The heroes then were created as man was about to come into the world in his most degraded form. And so the heroes offer a hopeful alternative. There are several classically recognized Greek heroes. Herakles and Odysseus are the best known. We'll talk about Odysseus in our next lecture, so in this one, let's focus on Herakles. The scholar Walter Burkert describes Herakles, better known to most of us by his Roman name Hercules, as the most popular of Greek heroes to modern audiences. Herakles was born as the result of an affair between Zeus and a mortal woman named Alcmene. As a result, Herakles was half god and half man. Hera, Zeus's wife, hated Herakles because he was a constant reminder of Zeus's infidelity, and Hera expends a great deal of energy making Herakles' life miserable. First, she tries to actually stop his birth. Then, she tries to prevent him from becoming the High King of Mycenae, establishing King Eurystheus as king instead. And finally, Hera induces Herakles to kill his own children, and in some versions of the story, his wife. However, Herakles is protected by another goddess, Athena, Zeus's daughter and Herakles' half-sister, so Hera is never quite able to defeat him. Ultimately, Herakles is given immortality, and he achieves status as a god. According to legend, while Herakles was a young man herding cattle on a mountainside, he was given a choice by two nymphs named Pleasure and Virtue. They offer him a choice between an easy but an unremarkable life or a hard but a glorious life. Of course, he's a hero, so he chooses glory. This is a classic hero move. Heroes in Greek mythology live big, always willing to risk death and hardship in order to face challenges. This doesn't mean that heroes are perfect. In fact, part of their appeal is that they are deeply flawed. Herakles, thrown into madness by the goddess Hera, murders his own family. And once he comes to his senses, he becomes desperate, looking for some way to atone for their deaths. The best-known stories about Herakles center on the work he does to atone for these murders, the 12 labors of Herakles. These labors are described in several texts, but the first record we have of a fixed collection of 12 labors seems to have appeared in an epic poem around 600 BCE, but that poem is now lost to us. According to the various story traditions, when Herakles realizes that he has murdered his family, he runs to the Oracle of Delphi, and he begs for a way to atone for his crimes. Again, this is another hallmark of the hero figure. He's a man who takes responsibility for his misdeeds, and he translates that responsibility into some kind of action. The Oracle, guided by Hera, instructs Herakles to serve King Eurystheus of Mycenae, the man who took the throne that Herakles should have occupied. Herakles is directed to serve this king for 10 full years, fulfilling whatever task the king sets before him. Herakles initially is reluctant to do this because of the history between the two men. Any service that Herakles performs for Eurystheus, therefore, is publicly humiliating, as well as physically demanding and dangerous. However, Herakles eventually agrees. King Eurystheus takes advantage of this opportunity. The king originally devises 10 tasks for Herakles to perform, but he ends up refusing to accept Herakles' efforts in 2 of them. As a result, the king requires 2 more tasks, and after completing the last task, King Eurystheus releases Herakles from service. In addition, Herakles receives immortality. Now, no single literary source describes all of the Herculean tasks. However, all 12 labors are depicted on the carved panels known as metopes on the Temple of Zeus in Olympia. Scholars reference this temple to argue that the 12 labors mythology must have been fairly well fixed by the mid-5th century BCE, since the temple, which is dated to around 450 BCE, records all of these labors. There is some dispute as to the sequence of the 12 labors, but traditionally they occurred as follows. First, Herakles slew the Nemean lion. Then he killed the multi-headed Hydra. Third, he caught the golden hind of Artemis. Fourth, he caught the Erymanthian boar. Fifth, he cleaned the Augean stables in a single day. Sixth, he killed the Stymphalian birds. Seventh, he captured the bull of Crete. Eighth, he stole the mares of Diomedes. Ninth, he took the girdle of Hippolyta, who was queen of the Amazons. And 10th, he stole the cattle of Geryon the giant. Eurystheus rejected Herakles' efforts in 2 of these tasks. He rejected the killing of the Hydra because Herakles' nephew helped him. The king also rejected the cleaning of the stables. In some accounts, the king rejects this work because Herakles received payment for the work. In other accounts, the king claims that the rivers that Herakles diverted in order to flush out the stables actually did all the real work. As a result of the king's objections, Herakles performs 2 more tasks. He steals the apples of Hesperides with the help of Atlas, and he captures Cerberus, the 3-headed dog who guards the entrance to the underworld. We don't have time to review each of these labors in detail, but it will be useful to examine a few of them to note some common elements that run throughout the entire series. In the first labor, Herakles is sent to slay a lion, but this is no ordinary lion. The Nemean lion has been terrorizing an entire town, luring young warriors into his lair and then devouring them. This lion has golden fur that is impervious to arrows. In some versions of the story, Herakles manages to shoot an arrow directly into the lion's mouth, which is not protected. In other versions, Herakles actually strangles the lion to death. After killing the lion, he skins the animal, but he can't remove the skin with an ordinary knife, so the goddess Athena directs him to use the lion's own claw to remove the hide. When Herakles returns to King Eurystheus with the Nemean lion's hide, the king is not only impressed, he's actually a little bit terrified. He begins to understand Herakles' strength. The king forbids Herakles from ever coming into the city again. Instead, he is ordered to present the evidence of his labors outside the city gates. And in some versions, the king never meets personally with Herakles again. Instead, he uses a go-between to communicate the tasks. This is a classic Labors of Herakles story and a classic hero myth. First, it involves a seemingly impossible task, the defeat of a creature with extraordinary powers. In the lion's case, the impenetrable fur renders the usual means of attack useless. From a mythological point of view, this means that Herakles, our hero, must demonstrate extraordinary abilities himself in order to triumph. In defeating the lion, he demonstrates several key qualities. First, he's fearless. Herakles, like all good heroes, steps into situations where others have perished. The targets of the labors are special. They are monsters, royal rulers, or divine creatures with special powers or protections. The assigned tasks all present special challenges in which Herakles risks his life. Second, our hero exhibits extraordinary strength. Herakles, in particular, is known for his brute strength, but in general, heroes are stronger and more skillful than other men. Third, Herakles is clever. Strength isn't enough to kill the Nemean lion. Herakles has to develop a strategy for attacking the lion in a new way, unlike the warriors who have attacked in the past. Different versions of this story present different strategies, but every version demonstrates Herakles' clever thinking. Finally, Herakles has divine assistance. The heroes of Greek myths have gods watching over them. Herakles is Zeus's son, so he's got some help there. But in the story of the Nemean lion, Athena, the goddess, also steps in to tell Herakles how to skin the lion. It's worth revisiting here the divine help that Herakles gets in accomplishing these tasks. As we've seen before, the gods and goddesses only selectively intervene in ordinary human affairs. They seem to have a greater stake in the affairs of heroes, however. In Herakles' case, it's like taking sides in an extended family squabble. If you side with Herakles, you automatically pit yourself against Hera. I tend to think that a story like this one reflects our own human desire to be the center of attention, even on a divine stage. After all, it's a measure of how important you are to see how many gods and goddesses will drop what they're doing and come to your aid. But again, only heroes and kings warrant this kind of attention. Most of us mere mortals do not. It's clear that no ordinary man could have fulfilled the task that King Eurystheus set for Herakles. So when Herakles returns, not only alive, but actually triumphant, the king has good reason to fear for himself and for his throne. He realizes that Herakles must be superhuman to have defeated that particular lion. And from that point forward, he makes Herakles' tasks more and more difficult. But this only makes Herakles appear increasingly powerful. In the second labor, Herakles must kill a multi-headed hydra. The problem is, whenever you cut off one of her heads, two more grow back. Herakles enlists his nephew's help, and together they use a firebrand to cauterize the wounds caused just after a head is cut off, making it impossible for a new head to grow. Herakles then uses a golden sword given to him by Athena to cut off the critical head of the Hydra, and she dies. Again, Herakles demonstrates fearlessness, great strength, strategic thinking, and a key relationship with the gods. Some of the tasks Herakles takes on do not involve a dangerous monster. In the fifth labor, Herakles is sent to clean the Augean stables. Scholars note that by this time, King Eurystheus is really frustrated, so he's trying to humiliate Herakles as well as give him an impossible task. The king insults Herakles by making him clean out manure, in effect treating him like a lowly stable boy. The stables hold over 1,000 cattle, and these stables had not been cleaned in 30 years, so the sheer size of the task adds insult to injury. Finally, Herakles is given only 1 day to clean all the stalls. It seems an impossible task, so the king has set up Herakles to fail in the most humiliating context possible. Amazingly enough, Herakles succeeds. He reroutes the Alpheus and Peneus rivers, which carry away all the accumulated dung. However, King Eurystheus refuses to acknowledge Herakles' efforts in this task, arguing that the rivers did all the real dirty work. In addition, the king notes that Herakles received payment from Aegeus' son for this task, so it shouldn't be counted toward his tasks for the king. The rest of the labors are very much like the ones we've described so far. Seemingly impossible tasks designed to make Herakles fail on a very public stage. Instead, Herakles becomes increasingly impressive. In his last labor, Herakles enters and leaves the underworld alive with divine assistance. He defeats Cerberus, the hound of hell, and he lays the beast at King Eurystheus' feet. The fact that Herakles has walked into the underworld and emerged unscathed so terrifies the king that he offers to stop assigning labors if Herakles will just take the beast back to the underworld. And thus the labors of Herakles come to an end. It seems fitting to me that Herakles' tasks end with a task in the underworld. We'll see next time that another hero, Odysseus, also journeys to the underworld. The journey to the realm of the dead is a classic hallmark of heroes' lives. The trip to the underworld acts as a metaphor for a kind of death to self. In Herakles' case, a task in the realm of the dead serves as the final step toward atoning for the murders he's committed and to secure his own immortality. Herakles walks through the land of the dead, and he's resurrected to lead a new life. After his 12 labors, Herakles joins Jason and the Argonauts on their quest for the Golden Fleece. In this journey, Hera manages to drive Herakles mad once again, and he throws Odysseus' best friend, Iphitus, over a wall, killing him. Again, Herakles seeks atonement through servitude. Eventually, Herakles is killed when his wife gives him a deadly tunic to wear. She has heard that he's been philandering, fooling around on her, and she's been told that this particular tunic will excite the love of her husband for her. In reality, the tunic has been smeared on the inside with the blood of the Hydra, or in other versions, the blood of the centaur Nessus. This blood acts as a poison, burning Herakles' flesh when he puts the tunic on. His mortal body is literally burned away, but he's left with an immortal form. Herakles is transformed, and he rises to Olympus as he dies, now an immortal god. Given Herakles' popularity, both in ancient Greece and in modern times, we should take some time now to ask, what does this specific hero figure tell us about Greek culture and values? Perhaps most surprisingly, the Herakles hero figure is imperfect. Herakles is known for being wild and unkempt. It's worth noting that in the 6th century BCE, Herakles became the patron of the Cynics, a group of philosophers who encouraged a retreat into a kind of pre-civilization wilderness, removing themselves from the current social, cultural, and political world. Instead, the Cynics advocated living at the margins of human society, denying themselves the basic comforts of civilized living, choosing to live in the forests, and sometimes dressing in animal skins. Herakles is also known for having a voracious appetite for sex, for wine, and for food, often leading to horrible results. His fooling around eventually leads to his mortal death. His wife gives him the tunic smeared in blood specifically in response to his cheating. Note that his wife's name, Deianira, literally means manslaughterer. This alone should have given him a clue. You could say that Herakles brought his painful death upon himself. However, Herakles is not Dionysus. His wild indulgences in sex, food, and drink are offset by acts of extreme self-denial. This, I would argue, is the key to Herakles' importance in Greek culture. While Herakles is clearly a flawed man who does some appalling things, he always atones for his misdeeds. He sets his world in order. In the process, he sets the world in order for others. He defeats monsters that threaten individuals and communities with his physical strength and his clever thinking. And he fathers families who, as it turns out, come to rule over various Greek city-states. Some have argued that the rampant philandering that the gods and Herakles engage in reflects a certain Greek appreciation for sexual prowess. For example, Herakles is known for sleeping with all 50 of Thespius's daughters in one night. However, we need to look a little bit deeper to understand this. Scholar John M. Bell argued that this story, and others like it, was less about sexual prowess or loose morals to the ancient Greeks, and more about ancestry. He notes that if Herakles slept with 50 women, and they all bore him children, then all of those descendants could claim Herakles as an ancestor. This kind of an ancestry has its social and political advantages, and Bell argues that that is the real point of the myth. He says, a whole vast, interconnected set of families is laying claim to descent from Herakles, and that has political implications. Other evidence supports Bell's theory. The Spartan royal system, for example, required that all their kings be descendants of Herakles. Herakles is distinct from other heroes in one more important way. He is the only figure in Greek mythology to be worshipped as both a mortal hero and as a god. In ancient Greece, the gods received sacrificial offerings in some kind of ritualized fashion. Mortals did not. Mortals may have received gifts in recognition of their achievements, but only the gods received sacrifices. Now, Herakles received both gifts appropriate to earthly heroes, and he also received altar-based goat or lamb sacrifices. And the ancient Greeks celebrated Herakleia, an annual festival that commemorated Herakles' death. While multiple shrines were erected to him throughout ancient Greece, his primary cult was in Thebes, where he was said to have been born. The most important of the Herakleia festivals were held there, and they included athletic games, musical competitions, and ritual sacrifices. These activities all reflect Herakles' own mythology, including his elevation to the status of a god. In addition, Herakles was known as a protector of the military. For example, the Thebans credited Herakles with helping win their war against the region of Phocis, and they made offerings to him as a result. Herakles was also worshipped as a protector of athletic events, growing out of his own physical strengths. He's considered one of the mythological founders of the Olympic Games. According to Pindar, Herakles fought Aegeus and defeated him. After that, Herakles then marked out the actual boundaries of the Altis, the sanctuary to Zeus in Greece's Peloponnese. Herakles is said to have established the Olympic Games there in honor of Zeus, as his father and as the supreme god. In one explanation of the original foot race run during the Olympics, Herakles is also credited with establishing the distance of that race by placing one foot in front of another 600 times. And finally, Herakles is said to have planted the olive tree from which the Olympic victors' crowns were formed. There are also worship practices surrounding Herakles that focus on less dramatic aspects of his life. These practices are interesting because some of them include elements that preserve mythology beyond the 12 labors. A cult, a worship community at Lindos on the island of Rhodes required that a plow ox be sacrificed and eaten in Herakles' name, and that the sacrificial ritual specifically included words of ridicule. This was said to be based on Herakles' own life. He arrived at Lindos hungry, so he butchered and ate an ox. The farmers who saw this hurled harsh words at him. Herakles actually was said to have enjoyed this, so he encouraged ridicule and verbal abuse in his own worship. In rituals at Antimachia on the island of Kos, the priest who supervised the Herakles cult was actually required to wear women's clothing. This is explained by a myth in which Herakles hid from his enemies under a woman's cloak. Herakles then allegedly ordered his devotees to commemorate this incident by having his male priest wear women's dress. There are two ways to understand the relationship between the cultic practices and the myths here. One is a fairly traditional argument, which maintains that the events described in the myth actually occurred, and they constitute the origins of the cultic practice that occurs. In this view, the rituals, in a sense, archive the mythology. Another approach is to argue that the myths were developed alongside or even after the cultic practices as post-dated justifications for specific ritual activities. We have no way of knowing the chronology for certain. Why do the stories of Herakles continue to appeal to modern listeners? Scholars point to the fact that the 12 Labors mythology follows a typical hero quest pattern in world mythology. The hero experiences some hardship or personal crisis that requires him to set out on a quest. This idea of the hero's journey can be traced back to the scholar Joseph Campbell, who argued that hero characters throughout worldwide mythology follow similar paths in their quests, with similar stages in these paths. According to Campbell, the hero's quest is always more than a simple geographic journey, and it involves more than accomplishing an external task. In the process of pursuing a tangible goal, the hero experiences an inner transformation. At the end of the quest, when he returns home, the hero has not only successfully met the physical challenge, he's changed as a person, and he's matured as a man. John M. Bell, a scholar of Greek mythology, ties the quest element in myth to the Greek appreciation for agonism or competition. The reward for the competition involved in a quest is the establishment or the revelation of one's true identity. This is true, Bell argues, whether it's a competition with the gods, with monsters, or with human opponents, and sometimes even with your own inner nature. Competition couched in the mythology of a quest acts as a crucible, purging the dross, crystallizing the hero's identity in his own mind, and ultimately in the eyes of the world. The Herakles hero stories invite comparisons with mythologies and other traditions. Some scholars note parallels to the Mesopotamian god Ninurta, who appears in an ancient Sumerian Akkadian text, and he fights 12 monsters, including a wild bull or a bison, a stag, the Anzu bird, a lion, and a 7-headed serpent. Herakles has also been compared to Shiva, a major deity in Hinduism, who also is known for wearing animal skin, carrying weapons, and leading a wandering nomadic life. Both Herakles and Shiva participate in civilization, but they actually live on the margins of society, and they both have uncivilized, destructive aspects to their personalities. The ancient Greek heroes like Herakles are created for physical exertion, usually for battle, with a moral dimension to their efforts. They are the supermen of Greek mythology. Not only are they physically strong, they usually also have one divine parent, which makes them not quite gods themselves, but godlike in their abilities. As a result, heroes can often succeed where others have failed. In addition, They are, for the most part, morally upright, although they are by no means perfect. As we've seen, Herakles fails big time, slaughtering his own children. When heroes fail, they fail big, so their failures can be catastrophic for other folks as well. On balance, however, over their lifetimes, heroes' good deeds outweigh their bad deeds, so they have a positive reputation in Greek mythology. Being special, however, has its downside. Heroes don't fit easily into the normal mortal world. They are marginalized figures. They don't tend to settle in one place. Instead, they are often on the move, traveling on quests to strange and dangerous places. The hero also lives in metaphorical marginal places. He doesn't live a settled family life. Instead, he's constantly battling demons in his own mind or dealing with the consequences brought about by his own character and choices. Superhuman physical strength can cause problems, especially when the hero loses control of that strength. And heroes tend to be subject to fits of anger. All in all, the life of a hero is difficult, and that is precisely what makes him a great mythological character. Herakles isn't the only hero in Greek mythology. Next time, we'll look at Odysseus, who has also been described as a hero. But Herakles is the ultimate example of a classic Greek hero. He manages to uphold traditional Greek values while not living a traditional Greek life. He travels to dangerous and exotic places, perhaps reflecting the Greeks' fascination with foreign lands and cultures. He struggles personally, but he manages to triumph over his struggles and to emerge from them a more mature person. And that part of the hero's journey speaks to us all.